Jake Harrison stood in the middle of the biggest room he had ever seen. The ceiling went up so high that he could not see where it ended. Lights floated in the air without wires or poles to hold them up. Aliens from all over the galaxy walked around, talking in voices that sounded like music, grinding metal or rushing water. Jake was the only human in the room. He felt small next to some of the aliens, but he did not let it show on his face. He had been a soldier for 15 years before coming to space. He had seen enough fights to know that size did not always win battles. A tall blue alien walked up to him. The alien had 4 arms and skin that looked like it was made of smooth stone. When it talked, its voice sounded like wind blowing through caves. "You are the human," the alien said. It was not a question. "I am Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire. I have heard that humans think they are tough." Jake looked up at the alien. Veltar was twice as tall as him and probably 3 times as heavy. "I don't know about all humans," Jake said, "but I can take care of myself." Veltar made a sound that might have been laughing. "Your planet is soft. You have rain and sunshine and food that grows everywhere. You have never known real hardship." "If you say so," Jake said. He did not argue. He had learned long ago that it was better to let people think what they wanted. The truth would come out later. More aliens gathered around them. Jake saw a creature that looked like it was made of rocks walking on 6 legs. Another alien looked like a giant bug with blue and green wings that made clicking sounds when it moved. There was one that seemed to be made of water, always changing shape but never spilling on the floor. A woman's voice spoke over a speaker system. "All contestants, please come to the center platform." The aliens moved toward a raised area in the middle of the room. Jake followed them. On the platform stood a woman with pale green skin and silver hair that moved like it was underwater. She wore a white coat that marked her as a scientist. "I am Dr. Lyra Voss," she said. "I will explain the rules of the survival challenge." A large screen appeared in the air above her head. It showed a gray and brown planet with no green anywhere on it. "This is Titan 7, Dr. Voss said. "It is a moon with very little air and almost no water. The temperature goes from burning hot in the day to freezing cold at night. There are no large animals and very few plants." The screen changed to show barren hills covered with small purple and red plants that looked like weeds. "Each of you will be dropped in a different area of Titan 7. You will have 5 days to survive. You can bring only basic tools and emergency food for 1 day. The winner is whoever survives the longest without calling for rescue." Veltar stepped forward. "What is the point of this test? Any fool can hide and eat emergency rations for 5 days. Dr. Voss smiled. "The emergency food is not enough for 5 days. It is meant to last only 12 hours. You must find your own food and water to survive." Jake looked at the screen again. The plants did not look like much, but he had eaten worse things during training. His grandfather had taught him about wild plants when he was a boy. His grandmother had shown him how to find food when there was no food in the stores. A rock-like alien named Krex spoke in a voice like grinding stones. "The weak will fall quickly. Only the strong will remain." The bug-like alien made clicking sounds that the translator turned into words. "Zixara calculates a 60% failure rate within 3 days." Other aliens nodded and made sounds of agreement. They all looked at Jake like he was already dead. "The human will not last 1 day," Veltar said. "Humans need their soft beds and warm food. They cannot handle real hardship." Jake said nothing. He had slept on rocks and in mud. He had eaten bugs and tree bark and anything else he could find. These aliens did not know what humans could do when they had to. Dr. Voss held up a small device. "This is your emergency beacon. Press the red button and we will come to get you. But once you use it, you are out of the challenge." She handed one device to each contestant. Jake put his in his pocket and hoped he would not need it. "You will also receive a basic survival kit," Dr. Voss continued. "It contains a knife, a water container, a small shovel, rope, and matches. Nothing else." Jake thought about what he could do with those tools. The knife was the most important. He could make other tools with it. The rope could become snares or fishing line. The matches could start fires, but he knew other ways to make fire too. The transport ship leaves in 1 hour, Dr. Voss said. Use this time to prepare yourselves. The aliens began to split up into groups. Some talked quietly about strategy. Others stood alone, thinking. Jake walked to a window that looked out at the stars. A small alien with gray skin and big eyes came up beside him. You do not seem worried, the alien said. Should I be? Jake asked. The others think you will die first. Humans are supposed to be weak. Jake smiled. People have thought that before. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they were wrong. The alien made a sound like a bird chirping. I am Nix of the Grax Republic. I study different species and how they survive. Humans are interesting because you are not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but you are still here when other species are gone. We're good at not giving up, Jake said. Yes, that is what makes you dangerous. Jake looked at the alien with surprise. No one had ever called humans dangerous for not giving up. Your planet was hard, Nix continued. Ice ages and volcanoes and diseases that killed most life. But humans survived all of it. You learned to eat anything and live anywhere. Other species think this makes you weak because you have no specialty, but I think it makes you very dangerous. The hour passed quickly. Soon all the contestants were on a transport ship heading toward Titan 7. Jake sat in his seat and closed his eyes. He thought about his grandfather's hands showing him which plants were safe to eat. He thought about his grandmother's voice telling him stories about the old days when food was hard to find. He thought about all the times he had been hungry and cold and tired but had kept going anyway. These aliens thought they knew what humans were like. They were about to learn that they were wrong. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Titan 7. Through the window, Jake could see the rocky surface getting bigger. In a few minutes, he would be alone on a world that wanted to kill him. He smiled and checked his equipment one more time. The pod hit the ground hard enough to rattle Jake's teeth. Metal groaned and something sparked in the control panel before everything went quiet. Jake waited a moment to make sure nothing was broken, then pushed the release button. The door opened. With a hiss, hot air rushed in and hit him like a slap. The sun was high and bright, making everything look white and yellow. Jake squinted and stepped out onto the rocky ground. The first thing he noticed was the smell. It was like metal and dust with something sweet underneath. The air was thin, but breathable. His chest worked harder to get enough oxygen, but he felt worse at high altitudes on Earth. Jake looked around at his new home for the next 5 days. Rocky hills stretched in every direction. The ground was covered with small plants that had thick, waxy leaves. Most were purple or red, but some were yellow and green. They grew in patches between the rocks like someone had scattered seeds randomly. He knelt down and looked at the plants more closely. The purple ones had leaves shaped like teardrops with fuzzy edges. The red ones grew low to the ground with fat, round leaves that felt rubbery. The yellow ones had tiny flowers that smelled sharp and clean. Jake pulled out his knife and cut a small piece from a purple plant. He touched it to his tongue carefully. It was bitter but not burning. He waited a few minutes to see if his mouth went numb or if his stomach felt strange. When nothing happened, he took a tiny bite. The taste was bad, like eating medicine, but he had eaten worse things. His grandfather had always said that hungry people could not be picky eaters. Jake spit out the piece and made a note in his head. Bitter, but probably safe in small amounts. He cut pieces from the other plants and tested them the same way. The red ones tasted like rubber and made his mouth feel dry. The yellow flowers were sour but not terrible. None of them made him feel sick. Jake stood up and looked at his emergency kit. The other contestants were probably eating their rations right now. They would make the food last as long as possible and hope to find something else before it ran out. That was smart thinking, but it was also thinking like someone who lived in cities and bought food from stores. Jake had different ideas. He opened his emergency rations and ate half of the protein bar. It tasted like cardboard with fake chocolate, but it gave him energy. He put the rest back in his pack. He would save it for when he really needed it. The first job was shelter. The sun was hot now, but Nix had told him that the temperature dropped fast when it got dark. Jake needed somewhere to stay warm and dry. He walked around until he found a spot where two large rocks leaned against each other. It would block the wind and give him a roof. Jake used his shovel to dig a shallow pit in the ground between the rocks. He lined it with flat stones to keep the cold from coming up through the dirt. Next, he needed materials for walls. The plants were too small, but their roots were long and tough. Jake dug up several plants and washed the dirt off the roots in his water bottle. The roots looked like thick string or thin rope. He found dead branches from larger plants that had dried up in the sun. They were light but strong. Jake used his knife to cut notches in the branches, then tied them together with plant roots to make a frame. He covered the frame with broad leaves from the larger plants. It was not pretty, but it would keep the wind out and his body heat in. Jake crawled inside to test it. The space was small but comfortable. He could sit up but not stand. That was fine. He was not planning to have parties. By the time he finished the shelter, the sun was starting to go down. Jake gathered dried plants and wood for a fire. He used his matches to light a small pile of the driest material. The fire caught quickly and burned with a blue and yellow flame. Jake was surprised to find that some of the plants burned very well. The waxy leaves acted like candles, burning slow and steady. That was useful information. Fire meant warmth and cooking and a way to purify water. He spent the last hour of daylight gathering more plants. Jake dug up roots and picked leaves, sorting them into piles by type. He found a plant with thick, fleshy roots that looked like small potatoes. Another had seeds and hard pods that rattled when he shook them. When it got dark, the temperature dropped fast. Jake crawled into his shelter and fed small pieces of waxy leaves to his fire. The flames gave him light to work by and kept his hands warm. He spent the evening processing his plant collection. Jake used his knife to peel the potato-like roots. The inside was white and had no smell. He cut thin slices and held them over, the fire on the tip of his knife. When they got hot, they started to taste like real potatoes. The seeds from the pods were hard and bitter, but when he roasted them over the fire, they got softer and tasted like nuts. Jake ate them slowly, chewing each one completely. By the time he was ready to sleep, Jake had eaten a full meal of roasted roots, seeds, and a few of the yellow flowers for flavor. His stomach felt full and satisfied. He had found water seeping from between two rocks and filled his bottle. He had shelter, fire, food, and water. Jake laid down on a bed of soft leaves and listened to the sounds of the night. Wind whispered through the rocks. Small creatures made clicking and chirping sounds. In the distance, his fire crackled quietly, casting moving shadows on the walls of his shelter. He thought about the other contestants. They were probably cold and hungry, trying to make their emergency rations last. Some might be wishing they had never signed up for the challenge. Jake was not thinking about home or comfort or rescue. He was thinking about tomorrow. He had found food today, but he needed to find more and better food. He needed to explore more of his area and see what else was available. He needed to make tools for digging and cutting and carrying. Most importantly, he needed to figure out how to turn survival into thriving. Any animal could hide and wait for rescue. But humans were different. Humans looked at empty land and saw farms. They looked at wild plants and saw dinner. They looked at problems and saw opportunities. The fire burned down to glowing coals. Jake banked them with ash so they would stay hot until morning. Starting a fire was easy with matches, but matches did not last forever. Tomorrow he would practice, making fire with rocks and plant fiber. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake smiled in the darkness. The aliens thought they were testing how long he could survive. They did not know they were actually testing how quickly he could build a new life. The night was cold, but inside his shelter with his fire and his full stomach, Jake was warm and comfortable. This was not surviving. This was living, and tomorrow he would live even better. Jake woke up before the sun came up. The coals from his fire were still warm, glowing red in the ash. He blew on them gently and added dried leaves until flames appeared. The fire chased away the cold and gave him light to see by. His body felt good. No hunger pains, no weakness, no headache from dehydration. Jake had slept well and eaten well. He was ready for day 3. Outside his shelter, the morning air was cold enough to see his breath. Jake drank water from his bottle and ate some of the roasted seeds he had saved from the night before. Then he picked up his knife and rope and went exploring. Over the past 2 days, Jake had learned a lot about his new home. The purple plants with bitter leaves grew mostly on the sunny side of rocks. The red plants with rubbery leaves liked shady spots where water collected. The yellow flowers opened in the morning and closed when it got hot, but there were other plants he had not tried yet. Jake found a patch of green plants with long, thin leaves that looked like grass. When he pulled one up, it came with a white bulb attached to the roots. He cut the bulb open and found that it was full of clear liquid that smelled like onions. Jake tasted a drop of the liquid. It was strong and made his eyes water, but it did not taste poisonous. He cut the bulb into small pieces and roasted them over his fire. The heat made them sweet and mild. They tasted like cooked onions mixed with potatoes. Near a crack in the rocks where water dripped down, Jake found moss that was soft and green. He tasted it carefully. It was not bitter or sour. It had almost no taste at all, but it was full of water and felt good to chew. Jake gathered handfuls of the moss and spread it on flat rocks to dry in the sun. By mid-morning, Jake had found 17 different plants that were safe to eat. Some were better than others, but all of them could fill his stomach and give him energy. He had more food options than most people had in grocery stores. Jake used his rope to make carrying bags from large leaves. He filled the bags with different plants and carried them back to his shelter. Then he spent time figuring out the best ways to prepare each type. The grass bulbs were good roasted or raw. The purple leaves were too bitter to eat by themselves, but when he mixed them with the sweet yellow flowers, they tasted fine. The red plants had tough skin, but the inside was soft and juicy when heated. Jake discovered that some plants tasted better when they were dried in the sun first. Others needed to be soaked in water to remove bitter juices. He learned which ones to eat raw and which ones had to be cooked. While he worked, Jake thought about the other contestants. By now, they were probably getting desperate. Their emergency. Rations were gone or almost gone. They were hungry and tired and probably scared. Jake was not scared. He was having fun. This was like a giant puzzle, and he was good at puzzles. Every new plant was a clue. Every successful meal was a victory. In the afternoon, Jake started working on tools. He used his knife to carve sharp points on straight branches. The points could be used for digging or for spearing small animals if he found any. He made a handle for his knife by wrapping plant fiber around one end. Jake found rocks that were hard and had sharp edges. He chipped pieces off them to make cutting tools and scrapers. He used plant sap to glue stone blades to wooden handles. The tools were crude but effective. With his new tools, Jake could dig deeper holes and cut through tougher plant stems. He could scrape roots clean and slice thick leaves into strips. Every tool made the next job easier. Jake built a second fire, pit away from his shelter. This one was for cooking during the day when he did not need the heat for warmth. He surrounded it with flat stones that absorbed heat and stayed hot long after the fire went out. The hot stones could cook food without using wood for fuel. He also built a frame for drying plants. Jake tied branches together to make a rack, then stretched it between 2 rocks. He could hang plants on the rack to dry them quickly in the sun and wind. Dried plants lasted longer and weighed less. They were perfect for storing food. By evening, Jake had created a small camp that looked like people had been living there for weeks. He had multiple fire pits, drying racks, tool-making areas, and food storage. Everything was organized and efficient. For dinner, Jake made his best meal yet. He roasted grass bulbs until they were golden brown. He made a soup from purple leaves and yellow flowers, seasoning it with onion-flavored liquid from the white bulbs. He added dried moss for texture and roasted seeds for protein. The meal was delicious. Jake ate until his stomach was completely full, then saved the rest for breakfast. He had cooked enough food for 3 meals. Tomorrow he would have even more time to explore and improve his camp. As darkness fell, Jake sat by his fire and thought about what he had learned. This place was not a wasteland, it was a garden. The aliens had called these plants weeds because they did not know how to use them. But Jake's grandmother had always said that weeds were just plants that people had not figured out yet. Jake pulled out the small recording device that Dr. Voss had given each contestant. They were supposed to make daily reports about their condition and experiences. Day 3 report, Jake said into the device. I am healthy and well fed. I have identified 17 edible plant species and developed methods for preparing each. 1. I have adequate shelter, multiple fire sources, and a growing collection of tools. He paused and looked around his camp. The fire cast warm light on his drying racks and tool collections. His stomach was full of good food. His shelter was warm and comfortable. I am not just surviving, Jake continued, I am building something. These plants provide complete nutrition when combined properly. The red ones have protein and minerals. The purple ones have vitamins. The yellow flowers have natural sugars for energy. A person could live here indefinitely with the right knowledge. Jake turned off the recording device and banked his fire for the night. Tomorrow was day 4. He was looking forward to it. In the distance, he could see lights in the sky. Those were probably rescue ships picking up contestants who had activated their emergency beacons. Jake wondered how many were left. He did not wonder for long. He was tired from a good day of work, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and new discoveries. Jake crawled into his shelter and fell asleep quickly, dreaming of gardens and tools and all the things he would build tomorrow. Day 4 started with the sound of engines overhead. Jake looked up from his morning fire to see a rescue ship flying away from the contest area. That made 6 contestants who had given up and called for help. Only 6 were left, including Jake. Jake ate a breakfast of roasted bulbs and dried fruit while he planned his day. He had plenty of food now, but he wanted to explore further from his camp. There might be better plants in other areas, or maybe he could find some of the small animals that Dr. Voss had mentioned. Before he left, Jake checked his camp one more time. His fires were banked safely. His tools were organized and ready to use. His food supplies were stored in the shade where they would stay cool. Everything was working perfectly. Jake filled his water bottle and put some travel food in his pocket. Then he climbed to the top of the highest hill near his camp. From up there, he could see for miles in every direction. The landscape was not as empty as it had first appeared. Jake could see green patches where water collected. He could see different types of plants growing in different areas. In the distance, he spotted what looked like a small lake or large pond. Jake also saw something else. Smoke rising from 3 different locations. That meant 3 other contestants were still alive and had fire, but the smoke was thin and weak. Those fires were probably small and desperate, burning whatever scraps the contestants could find. Jake's fires produced thick, steady smoke because he had plenty of fuel. He had learned which plants burned best and how to keep flames going all day with minimal attention. His fires were tools, not just sources of warmth. Jake climbed down from the hill and walked toward the green patch he had seen. It was further than it looked, but the walk was easy. His body was strong and healthy from eating well and staying active. The green patch turned out to be a small valley where water ran down from higher ground. The soil was darker and richer than the rocky areas. Plants grew thicker and taller here. Some were types Jake had never seen before. One plant had broad leaves and thick stems full of sweet juice. Another had clusters of small purple berries that tasted like grapes mixed with mint. Jake found vines with pods full of beans that were delicious when roasted, but the best discovery was a plant that looked like wheat or rice. It had tall stalks topped with clusters of seeds. The seeds were small, but there were thousands of them. When Jake tasted them, they were nutty and filling. This was like finding a grain field in the wilderness. Jake spent hours in the valley, gathering samples of everything and testing them carefully. He found enough new food sources to feed a family for weeks. This place was a treasure hidden in what the aliens thought was a wasteland. On his way back to camp, Jake heard a sound that made him stop and listen. It was a voice calling for help, weak and desperate. Jake followed the sound until he found another contestant. It was Veltar, the tall blue alien who had been so sure that humans were weak. Now Veltar was sitting on the ground leaning against a rock. His blue skin had turned pale gray. His forearms shook with weakness. Human, Veltar said when he saw Jake. His voice was barely a whisper. My emergency beacon? I cannot find it. Jake looked around and saw the beacon lying a few feet away. Veltar was too weak to reach it. The alien had not eaten in at least 2 days. His lips were cracked from thirst and his eyes were sunken. You are dying, Jake said. It was not a question. Yes, Veltar admitted. I was wrong about humans. You are not weak. Jake picked up the emergency beacon and put it in Veltar's hand. Press the red button. The rescue ship will come. Veltar's finger trembled as he pressed the button. A light began flashing and a signal went out. Why do you help me? Veltar asked. I said cruel things about your species. Jake sat down next to the alien and pulled food from his pocket. Eat this, he said, offering roasted bulbs and dried berries. It will help until the ship gets here. Veltar ate gratefully, tears running down his face. I thought I was superior. I thought my training and my strength made me better than soft humans, but you are thriving while I am dying. You are not weak, Jake said. You just did not know what you were doing. This is not your fault. The rescue ship arrived 20 minutes later. Medical personnel loaded Veltar onto a stretcher and carried him inside. As the ship was leaving, Veltar raised one arm in a gesture that Jake recognized as a salute. Jake walked back to his camp as the sun was setting. Now there were only 5 contestants left. Tomorrow was the last day of the challenge. That evening, Jake made his biggest meal yet. He had so much food that he could afford to be generous with portions. He cooked grain seeds into a thick porridge. He made soup from berries and sweet juice. He roasted beans and bulbs until they were golden brown. Jake ate until he was completely satisfied, then prepared extra food for breakfast. He had enough supplies to last for days beyond the end of the challenge. If this had been a real survival situation instead of a test, he could have lived here for months. As he sat by his fire, Jake thought about Veltar and the other contestants who had given up. They were not bad people or weak people. They had just never learned the skills they needed. They came from worlds where food came from stores and water came from pipes. They had never had to look at an empty field and see dinner. Jake recorded his daily report. Day 4 complete. I assisted a fellow contestant who was in medical distress. I discovered a new area with additional food sources, including grain-like seeds that could support long-term habitation. My health remains excellent and my food supplies are abundant. Jake paused and looked around his camp. In 4 days, he had built something that looked like a small village. He had shelters, work areas, storage systems, and sustainable food production. He had turned a survival challenge into a demonstration of human adaptability. If this challenge continued for weeks or months instead of days, Jake continued, I believe a permanent settlement would be possible. These plants provide all necessary nutrition, and the environment is manageable with proper techniques. Jake turned off the recorder and prepared for his last night on Titan 7. Tomorrow the rescue ships would come for all remaining contestants. The challenge would be over and he would return to the space station. But Jake found himself wishing the challenge would continue. He had just gotten started. Give him a few more weeks and he could have gardens growing. Give him a few months and he could have a real farm. Give him a year and he could have a town. That was the difference between surviving and living. Surviving was about lasting until rescue came. Living was about building something better than what you had before. Jake banked his fires and went to sleep in his comfortable shelter. Tomorrow would be the end of the challenge, but it was also the beginning of something new. The galaxy had learned something about humans in the past 4 days. Soon everyone would know that humans were not weak, creatures from a soft world. They were gardeners who could plant hope in any soil. Jake woke up on the 5th morning feeling sad that the challenge was ending. He had never been so comfortable in a survival situation. His shelter was warm, his fires were steady, and he had enough food to feed several people. Outside, the morning air was crisp and clear. Jake could see smoke from only 2 other locations now. That meant only 3 contestants had made it to the final day besides himself. One was probably Krex, the rock-like alien who could hibernate to save energy. Jake did not know who the others were. Jake ate a large breakfast and began packing up his camp. The rescue ships would arrive in the afternoon, but he wanted to be ready. He also wanted to leave the camp in good condition. Maybe someone else would use it someday. As he worked, Jake heard the sound of engines overhead. A rescue ship was landing nearby. That meant someone else had called for help. Jake wondered if any other contestants besides him would finish the full 5 days. Jake finished packing and decided to take one last walk through his territory. Over the past 5 days, he had learned every plant and rock in his area. He knew where the best food grew and where water could be found. He knew which plants were good for medicine and which ones made the best tools. This knowledge felt valuable, like something that should not be wasted. Jake pulled out his recorder and began documenting everything he had learned. "Final report," he said as he walked. "Location documentation for future reference. The purple bitter plants grow best on south-facing slopes with good drainage. They should be harvested in the morning when the bitter compounds are lowest. Mix with yellow flowers to improve taste." Jake continued recording as he visited each area of his territory. He explained how to identify the different plants, when to harvest them, and how to prepare them for eating. He described his tools and how to make them. He gave detailed instructions for building shelters and fire pits. "The grain plants in the lower valley could support a permanent population," Jake said. "With proper cultivation, this area could produce enough food for a small colony. Water is available year-round from underground springs." By the time Jake finished his documentation, it was nearly noon. He returned to his camp and sat down to wait for the rescue ships. He ate lunch and tended his fires one last time. At exactly 2 o'clock, the official contest ships arrived. 3 large vessels landed in different areas to pick up the remaining contestants. Jake watched one ship land near his camp. Dr. Lyra Voss stepped out of the ship, followed by medical personnel and recording equipment. She walked toward Jake's camp with an expression of amazement on her face. "Contestant Harrison," she said formally. "Are you in need of medical assistance?" "No, ma'am," Jake replied. "I am healthy and ready for pickup." Dr. Voss looked around the camp. She saw the multiple fire pits, the tool-making areas, the food storage systems, and the drying racks. She saw the comfortable shelter and the organized workspaces. "This is remarkable," she said. "It looks like people have been living here for weeks." "Just 5 days," Jake said. "But I tried to do things properly." The medical personnel scanned Jake with their instruments. They looked at the readings with surprise and confusion. Finally, the lead medic spoke to Dr. Voss. "His vital signs are better than when he started," the medic reported. "He has actually gained weight and his fitness levels have improved. His blood work shows excellent nutrition and no signs of stress or dehydration." Dr. Voss stared at Jake. "You gained weight? During a survival challenge?" Jake smiled. "The food here is really good once you know how to prepare it. I was eating better than I do at home." "Show me," Dr. Voss said. Jake led her to his food preparation area. He demonstrated how to roast the grain seeds, how to make soup from berries, and plant juice, and how to cook the bulbs until they tasted like potatoes. He showed her which plants were safe raw and which ones needed to be processed first. Dr. Voss tasted each dish carefully. Her eyes widened with surprise. "This is actually delicious," she said. "We classified all these plants as inedible weeds. My grandmother always said that weeds are just plants whose value has not been discovered yet," Jake said. "These plants have everything a person needs to stay healthy: protein, vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates. You just have to know how to use them." The recording crew filmed everything as Jake explained his techniques. They documented his tools, his shelter, his food storage, and his cooking methods. Dr. Voss asked hundreds of questions about human survival training and Earth's history. "How did you know to do all this?" she asked. "Humans have been survivors for a long time," Jake explained. "We evolved on a difficult planet where food was often scarce. We learned to eat almost anything and adapt to any environment. Every human carries this knowledge in their genes. But the other species have similar evolutionary pressures," Dr. Voss said. Jake shook his head. "Not really. Most spacefaring species evolved on stable worlds with consistent food sources. They became specialists. Humans remained generalists. We never forgot how to live off the land because we had to do it for so long. Dr. Voss made notes on her tablet. What about the other contestants? Why did they fail? They did not fail, Jake said firmly. They just did not have the right training for this environment. Veltar is a great warrior, but he was never taught to forage for food. Krex is incredibly strong, but strength does not help you identify edible plants. They all have valuable skills. They just were not the right skills for this challenge. The rescue ship loaded Jake's equipment and samples of his food. As they flew back to the space station, Dr. Voss continued asking questions. She wanted to understand how Jake had turned a survival challenge into a comfortable camping trip. Were you ever worried about failing? She asked. Jake thought about it. No. I was worried about not learning everything I could. This place has so much potential. I felt like I was just getting started when the challenge ended. What would you have done with more time? Started a garden, built better tools, explored the whole moon. Maybe found some of those small animals you mentioned and learned to domesticate them. Jake smiled. Give me a year and I could have had a real settlement going. When they arrived at the space station, Jake learned that only 3 contestants had completed the full 5 days. Krex had survived by hibernating and eating almost nothing. Zixara had used mathematical calculations to stretch emergency rations. Both were weak and hungry when they were picked up. Jake was the only contestant who had thrived instead of merely surviving. The story spread quickly through the galactic community. News reports called it the Weed Eater Miracle and How a Human Turned Hell into Home. Jake gave interviews to scientists and survival experts from dozens of species. Within a week, Jake received job offers from governments and corporations throughout the galaxy. They wanted him to teach survival techniques, plan colony sites, and train their people in emergency preparedness. Jake accepted a position as Director of Adaptive Survival Training for the Galactic Federation. His first assignment was to develop training programs based on human survival techniques. His first students were the same aliens who had competed against him in the challenge. Veltar was among the first to sign up for training. The proud Zephyrian warrior had learned that strength and superiority meant nothing without knowledge and adaptability. Teach me to see food where I saw only weeds, Veltar requested. Jake smiled and picked up a handful of the purple plants that grew in planters around the station. Lesson 1, he said. These are not weeds. They are dinner. Let me show you how to cook them. The legend of the human who smiled while aliens starved became a cornerstone story in humanity's growing reputation among the stars. It proved that sometimes the greatest strength was not in superior technology or physical power, but in the ability to look at any situation and find a way to make it better. Jake Harrison had not just survived a challenge. He had shown the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped trying to merely endure and started trying to build something new. In the end, the aliens learned that humans were not weak creatures from a soft world. They were gardeners who could plant hope in any soil, no matter how barren it seemed.